Well, thank you, Paul. Thanks everybody for coming today. My name's Dan Bowman. I've been in Jakarta a long time, and I've been observing politics there from about 1991. We have a change in the government in Indonesia. Pak Prabowo, Jojo Hadikusumo, as you know, has won the presidency. He won a resounding victory. And a part of it was that he was able, as we'll see in a minute, to get a very large campaign contribution from an up-and-coming businessman. And he has consolidated his position by winning most of the parliament seats and most of the local elections, but he doesn't have an outright majority in parliament yet. There are a couple of interesting exceptions, and this is a demonstration of the strength of the Indonesian democracy. In Aceh, the governor was a GAM person who basically, they kept re-electing GAM because GAM told the people they represented independence, they represented prosperity, they represented taking money from the criminals in the central government, and they didn't deliver. And the GAM governor lost to a non-GAM person, and I think that's very significant. Also in Jakarta, Prabowo and his coalition, Jokowi, who's so far in Prabowo's coalition, put up a governor candidate who lost outright. In other words, there was not a runoff election, lost outright to the Megawati-backed governor. So the Indonesian democracy is functioning, and I think that's a very important point because there are people in Jakarta who say the democracy in Indonesia is a failure. It's not bringing prosperity to the people, and it needs to be changed back to a more authoritarian way of government. That I don't think is going to be tolerated by the locals. There was an attempt to do that a few months ago. They were trying to change the local election laws so that only the hand-picked candidates in the majority could run. There were major student protests, and they backed off. So I would say that the Indonesian democracy is healthy. There's something also about Indonesian democracy that's interesting. They have this thing called the empty box, which means that if you have one candidate that is put up in an election, you can vote for none of the above. And in 5 different races around the country, the empty box won. And the empty box won in a place called, and again, Indonesia is such a bizarre place sometimes. The empty box in Bangka Island, which is where all the tin is mined, won because the governor was unable to continue the illegal mining industry. So the illegal miners all voted for the empty box. It's just fantastic stuff to watch. Next slide, please.
Is there still illegal mining?
We'll get to that. I say, it'll come. Yeah, it's going to come back. Yeah,
it's the efficient mining in Indonesia.
It'll come back in a different format. So Prabowo, I'm supposed to talk about Prabowo and economics. So his program is called Prabowonomics. He wrote a book about it. You can read the book. It sounds like Karl Marx wrote it. It's basically all about government investment in the people, and it doesn't talk at all about private enterprise, capitalism, or economic formation. Skipping to the last point, does he mean it? Yeah, he sort of means it. He does. He's in my opinion, he's a principled fellow who really cares about his fellow citizens. He doesn't know how to do it, but he knows he's going to have to spend to do it. So he wants to, you can just see here, he wants to achieve 8% growth. Good luck. Highest GDP growth in the last 10 years, 6%. They're looking at maybe 5.2% this year. And he wants to vaguely have state capitalism create, it's like Sim City. So he wants to build a smelter here and a smelter there, and then pretty soon investment will come. I don't know that that's going to work, but he is a flexible enough person, in my opinion, to take advice, to pursue policies that will incent investment. And other people are thinking that too. Let's have the next slide, please. So Prabowo started out, I mean, remember, he's been in office for less than a month. And the first thing he did is he said, we're going to spend like crazy. And he has these populist policies. Number one, he forgave all the debt of small and medium enterprises, which actually some economists say might not be a bad idea. You know, modern monetary theory says that if you have a sector that's way underwater, one of the ways you can do it is to forgive all the debt. So he did that, 630 million. Raised the salaries of all the teachers. You know, that there's a lot of teachers, so that made him very popular. That'll cost $1 billion. Raised the minimum wage. All the unions came in and said, dude, you know, you're not keeping up with inflation. And we want, you know, they started out with like a 10% raise, which is ridiculous. They were expecting maybe 5%. And Prabowo came back and said 6.5. So he's very popular, 10 billion. He's going to distribute food to everybody in the country. He's not really sure how to do it, but that's going to cost 28 billion. And then you have the subsidies, huge amount of subsidies. Indonesia is a net importer of many petroleum products. The subsidy is a huge amount. They had a rice crop failure last year, so they had to buy over 1 million tons of rice from third parties. That really cut into foreign exchange. And then they have a whole list of other subsidies for people, for poor people. They also have national insurance now. Now, you know, this is actually a good thing. The people in Indonesia really appreciate these programs because many of them cannot find formal employment. There are huge amounts of people in the informal sector. Let's go to the last thing. He was gonna pay for it with a small increase in the value added tax from 11% to 12%. And business said, by the way, that's going to kill all the retail business. So now it's only on luxury goods. So his minister of finance is pulling her hair out. She agreed to be in the new government. And he's making all these promises that he cannot pay for with taxes. Indonesia has one of the lowest tax, not rates, but the lowest tax compliance in the world. So they don't have much to pay taxes. So how does he do it? He borrows it. Next slide, please. So Jokowi financed his ascension, and I think I've talked about this in previous meetings. Jokowi is he is not royalty. Prabowo is royalty, and Megawati is royalty. Jokowi is, and I'll quote this, Prabowo said this himself to me. He said that Jokowi is a tukang andong, which means a horse cart driver. That was in the 2014 election before he became enormously popular. So, but Jokowi bought his way into royalty by investing in all sorts of stuff, some political stuff, some infrastructure stuff that was highly popular, and some rescuing of political friends. So you can see on the left-hand side, these are numbers that are taken from a very granular study of Chinese lending into Indonesia that was done by William and Mary. And you can go through it, there's hundreds of entries. And basically what happened is that Jokowi borrowed about $133 billion. And that added to the Indonesian debt. Next slide, please.
There's a date error. Since what year was it? It says 2025.
Oh, that shouldn't be. That should be actually since 2002.
2000.
Yeah, sorry about that. It should be. So the William and Mary data set, which I would really highly suggest, there's a 3.0 now. It goes through every single Chinese loan to Indonesian business since 2002. And it's a huge data set, really very useful. So Indonesia's debt, you know, everybody talks about the debt trap. I don't think Indonesia is going to get there. They have done you know, for all of the shenanigans that go on, they have a rock solid Ministry of Finance. Probably because Suharto started it with Prabowo's father, who was one of the big economists, and you know, basically they have created they've got 150 billion of US dollars. In 1997, they ran it down to zero. The banks pounced. They put the rupiah from 2,000 to 15,000 overnight. They caused a revolution in Indonesia, and the Indonesians said this is never going to friggin' happen again. And they have 150 billion in foreign exchange, and they're spending is relatively modest, about 40% of GDP. So they're borrowing, sorry, not their spending. Their borrowing is about 40% of GDP. So economists, and I'm not an economist, say you can pretty much get up to 60% without it having a huge effect on your economy. And Prabowo looks like he's going to do it. It looks like he's going to borrow above the self-imposed 3% cap of borrowing as a percentage of GDP. He's already said, I'm going to do it, and almost certainly he's going to do it. His programs in the previous slide probably will bring it up to maybe 50% of GDP, but he can't pay for it because there's not a lot of taxes. And the economy is, during the Jokowi time, the economy went crazy because of the price of coal and the price of nickel went up at the same time. But now, since it's a mineral-dependent economy, still, it has tanked, and we're not really sure, how this is going to affect the Indonesian tax collections and also the job outlook.
Coal's the answer.
Well, I don't know, maybe. Next slide, please.
And just to put that in perspective, I think Americans running at 99% debt.
No, more than that.
Is it? It's over that now.
Well, they're the reserve currency, so they can get away with it. So Indonesia has part of this presentation is about what are they going to do? Well, Jokowi's idea was to create, and there's an article by E. Warburg that calls them nationalist enclaves. They're called special economic zones. And I was working on this 25 years ago to create something called the economic zones. And they took up the idea, basically you take a place, you build a big fence around it, you keep all the locals out, you invite investment and reduce the government bureaucracy, and then you have people invest. And the Chinese have invested in many, many smelters. That's why I call it smelter a go-go. And it looks like Prabowo is going to continue that policy. The Ministry of Mines just yesterday came out and said, we're building more smelters. We're going to build aluminum smelters now. We've already built so many nickel smelters that we have to buy ore from Philippines to fill them up. And we're going to put a moratorium on that one. But now we're going to go into aluminum smelters. They're going to ask Freeport to build a third copper smelter in Fak. In addition to the new smelter they just reluctantly built in Surabaya, which immediately caught fire and also loses $2 billion a year. So you can see the point of this is that the Indonesian policy toward economic development seems to be almost sort of mystical in a way, build it and they will come. And it's like Sim City. So I'm not sure that it's a good policy, but I think that can change. Next slide, please. Okay, so what is Trump? What is Prabowo going to do going forward? His populist policies have been rolled out, and now he's got to pay for them. So an interesting article just came to my phone like 10 minutes ago, where the European Chamber of Commerce and the American Chamber of Commerce simultaneously criticized Jokowi in his last 10 years in office. And this is for those two organizations to stick their little heads up and say something like that is truly remarkable. And they either believe that Prabowo is going to split from Jokowi's economic policies, or that he is going to be sufficiently pro-Western that they can say this kind of stuff. And that, for me, that's a signal. And of course, if you live in Indonesia, you look for signals. It's kind of like, you never know what's happening, and then you see a signal and you go, hey, something's happening there. Also, at a recent gathering of American companies to invest in Indonesia in the United States, which usually has about 3 participants, and they're always the same ones, they had 100 people. So there are some new entrants who are looking at Indonesia again. So Indonesia, I think, may become a bit more attractive to foreign investment. It could actually happen depending on what Prabowo does, but he could be derailed by the whole previous Biden relationship. And this is a bit of a complex story, but ESG is a trade barrier, and the Indonesians know it. They don't have any intention of investing their own funds to comply with American ESG or DEI policies or JTEP, which is the Joint Energy Transition Program. It just isn't going to happen. It's kind of ridiculous, and the Americans know that. So this was a trade barrier between the U.S. and Indonesia, and it caused friction. But with Trump coming in, I think they're just gonna get rid of all that stuff. They're gonna get rid of JTEP, which has only expended 1% of its $20 billion allocation. They're going to forget about the critical minerals agreement. They're going to forget about some of the environmental trade restrictions, and Trump's going to make a deal. He's going to make some sort of deal. We're not sure what the deal is going to be, but we got a little indication the other day. Somebody told Trump that BRICS means that they're against the American dollar. So Trump came out and said, if you join BRICS, and you don't pledge allegiance to the American dollar, we're going to put 100% tariff on your imports to the United States. Now that affects Indonesia because there's 10 times more, more than 20 times more exports from Indonesia to the U.S. than U.S. to Indonesia. So that should be a bit alarming. But Trump, who knows? He says things, and who knows if he really means them. I think he and Prabowo probably can get along okay, and they could probably negotiate some deals. And in fact, those of us who live in Indonesia have been advising the government poobahs from the U.S. who come over to, strike an individual deal, and do something that's reasonable. Bring some investment in some private companies that, because of their shareholders, do ESG. The private companies do. Instead of pounding the Indonesian government over the head and telling them you must implement ESG, put in, do the Gresham's law, reverse Gresham's law, where the good investment drives out the bad investment. That would be the prescription, and they may listen to that. Next slide, please. So again, this is just there was a recent meeting. And a lot more people came in, which is another sign. It's another sign here. Next slide, please. Okay, so this is and this is a bit of a sidelight. So Prabowo was looking for campaign finance, and about maybe 8 or 9 months, right about the time that his popularity zoomed, and Jokowi joined him, and his popularity went up to stratospheric heights. He found a donor, and the donor who financed his campaign is a guy named Haji Isa, who is a former OJEC driver and made $1 billion in trading illegal coal. So what he did is he would go, and he had an excavator, and he would fill up a truck, and it would go to an illegal coal port, and he'd sell it. And then he got really good at it. And then pretty soon some of the security authorities said, hey, how'd you like to manage that for me? And the guy became a billionaire. And
be more specific, the police or the military?
I don't want to be more specific than that. Don't want to be more, so I gotta be careful. So, but he financed Prabowo's campaign. And as a matter of fact, people in Prabowo's relatives told me, they said, well, we had a secret weapon here, and this is going to end. Because 8 months before, when everybody in the public was kind of like, is he going to get elected? They said, yeah, he's going to get elected. So what he got in return was he basically got the southeast corner of Papua, which is where Merauke is. And this is where the government wants to put in, they want to grow sugarcane for biofuel, so they can be like Brazil, and they can reduce the imports, which is a big problem with the budget. And they also want to put in a food estate, because they had a bitter experience with the rice imports last year. So this guy, he bought 3,000 excavators from China. And they are, if you look at the satellite photos, they're slowly gobbling their way up the river mouth, and then they're going to turn right, and they're going to go into this gigantic plantation. And from a political perspective, that means Prabowo has a new friend who's a bit of a counterbalance to the old friends. And it's fascinating to watch it. I mean, it's, it's kind of a Horatio Alger story that this guy is in there. And what is he going to do in that area? And is the plantation going to work? Is the biofuel program going to work? I don't know. Historically, none of that has worked. Suharto tried it. They've tried it a number of times because of technical reasons. It hasn't worked. But this program is going on, and this is a new guy that is a new player, just like Jokowi was a new player. I just thought it was interesting, and I mentioned it. Next slide, please. So in April, Paul invited me up here to make talk. So I predicted Trump's Prabowo is going to open business sectors to Western companies by sweetening the agreements. I think it's going to happen. I think it's going to happen. I'm seeing signs that it's going to happen. Those of us who are in Indonesia are trying to get policy change recommendations to the Prabowo government that would make it more likely that a Western business would come in, because over 10 years, the bureaucracy has ruined the contractual environment for business. They ruined it for oil and gas. They ruined it for mining. And, it's just, they've introduced so much uncertainty and corruption into the process. It has to be changed before any Western business will want to come back in, because they have alternatives like Thailand, right? Where things are a little bit less wild. Continue China engagement, additional investment in bounded sectors. Yeah, so the Chinese are talking about lending some more money for these other smelters. They're 133 billion into it. The Belt and Road project seems to be contracting a little bit. It was spread all over the world, even to Latin America, and it seems to be contracting a little bit. But Indonesia still seems to be getting decent loans for their projects. Now, they may be a little bit harder on project finance, and I want to bring up an example. So Yunnan Tin, which is the biggest tin company in the world, was invited in to rescue the moribund Tambang Tima. And Yunnan Tin came in and they said, okay, maybe we'll take over everything you have, but we want you to prove the reserves that you have in your portfolio. And Tambang Tima went to a bunch of Western experts and they said, will you certify that our reserves are there? And nobody could do it because there's been so much illegal tin mining, you don't know how much is left. So the Yunnan Tin deal is sort of teetering a little bit. And in the previous Chinese Belt and Road program, they just would have said, don't care about that technicality, use state bank, go lend to that project. So I think the Chinese are being more selective into what they're investing in, which means that I don't think there's going to be a flood of Chinese investment. Demote police and attempt to place back under the military. There's a lot of proposals to that. I talked to one of Lou Hoot's relatives the other day, who's a Kopassus general, and I said, "Are you worried that there could be conflict between the military and the police over changing the police's role?" And he said, "No way." He said, if the military wants to do it, the military will do it. Now that's coming from a military guy, but the police have mushroomed. They are the muscle behind Jokowi, and they have mushroomed all over the country, and their businesses are humongous. And the military knows that. They're slightly jealous, and they're also slightly worried because the military had a territorial command many years ago, which gave them eyes and ears all over the country, and that was dismantled in 2002 with the separation of the police and military, and they want that back. And from a security standpoint, they are making a lot of noises to that. Shafri Samsudin said they're going to form 100 new battalions, which may be bullshit, maybe not. I don't know. Shafri is a pretty good guy. And they've said that they want to place these battalions all around Indonesia. So it may be back to the future a little bit with the old programs of Abri Masuk Desa, where there's military guys in the desas. And in my opinion, this would not be a bad thing. I think it would actually be a good thing. anyway, that is happening. Increased central government control over the regions. Yeah, well, central government, the central government doesn't have a lot of power outside of the core area. Once you get into the regions, the locals really call the shots, no matter what the central government says, especially on natural resources. Which is another reason they want to put these enclaves, these special economic zones, which have a lot more central government control. Slowly eliminate direct elections. Yeah, they tried that. So the very first thing they did is they went in and they made a proposal to amend the election law so that only the candidates chosen by the parliamentary, the threshold was such that only the big parties could nominate candidates. So all the students came into the streets, and it was kind of like a miniature 1998 thing. It was kind of exciting, and it was on the news. And Tom Lembong, who is a Harvard-educated economist, was in there with the students, and he was up there saying, "No, we can't do this, et cetera, et cetera." And the government backed down. So they're going to try again. There's some negotiations right now about the election law. They're going to try again, but Lembong, right after that, suddenly was put in jail for on a spurious. They said that he was guilty of corruption while he was trade minister, but it really was because he was at the head of this, basically protest against changing the election system. Pacify Papua. Not doing so good. I mean, I say sold, not pacified. So Haji Isam got the southeast corner. But the rebels, it seems like even the government says the number of rebels in the TPNPB is increasing. And John Cutts, who's our mutual friend who just got back from the rebel area, says that they're moving around. So they have these groups are sort of moving around the highlands, and they're pestering some projects. And from a security standpoint, if a company had an oil and gas concession or something like that, they would really have to look really, really hard at where these guys are and how to insulate themselves, because they're uncontrollable. They're better shots than the military are, and they pick the military and the police off sort of at will, but they're still fairly small, not pacified. Conservative fiscal policy to avoid a European meltdown. Yeah, that was wishful thinking. He is not going to pursue a conservative fiscal policy, and that is going to make so I'm going to make another prediction. Sri Mulyani, who's the Minister of Finance, will resign within 6 months, because she's in the middle here. She's saying, Bapa, we don't have enough money to pay for these programs, and we're not, the economy's not doing so good. And he's saying, hey, do you want me to continue in office? So I think they're going to butt heads here. And it really, if he gets investment, this is very much like Suharto inheriting a bit of a mess. If he gets some significant investment, especially from Western companies, he could pull this off. And remember, Prabowo does not have children. He has got one kid who's a fashion designer who lives in London. A really nice kid, great fashions. He designed the team uniforms for the Olympic team, and they were great. And he's back in Jakarta being sort of a gatekeeper for his dad. But he has no political ambitions. Most of his kids don't have the same political ambitions and the same cruel streak that Suharto's kids do. And I think that he is he has the potential to be a really good president, although he's 72 years old. And he'll be 77 at the end of his term. And will he go for another term? Unlikely. His health is okay. He's on a diet, and they fixed his leg. So he's okay, and he'll go for another 5 years. So that's my presentation. I'm more hopeful about Indonesia from a business perspective than I have been for a long time. 10 years of Jokowi was an absolute nightmare, and for Western business. And I think it'll be better here soon. Okay, Paul, that's it. Did I